Love you just the way you are.
Hello and welcome. I am the Reverend Neil Aitchison. I'll be your host this afternoon. I'm glad you all found the change in venue, and it's really no surprise that we needed a bigger space to celebrate our friend Phil Bast and to bring honor to his family. Now, as we remember, a great citizen of our community. The part about me being a minister was just a bit careless with the truth. But everything else you're going to hear today will be true and heartfelt. I injected that in there just as a shot at some humor, because this could easily become a difficult goodbye to a friend who left us much too soon. And I come from a very emotional family. My dad and I would cry at the opening of a Walmart. So bear with us as we celebrate Philip Aaron Bast. Now, I've emceed many different functions in this community. I've performed on this stage many times, but it's the first time I've had to officially host a memorial service. And I believe it to be entirely appropriate that we pay tribute to Phil on one of the stages of one of Canada's most successful theater companies. Now, of course, we got to give Alex Moustakis credit for creating this successful theater empire, but we have to credit people like Phil Bast, who made sure those within his sphere of influence knew all about Drayton Entertainment and so many more, and all the productions they produced. He and Barb were here at every opening. His video reports, his cuts and clips and interviews have been a staple in the record. On their video features, he fed Rogers Cable all sorts of arts and entertainment news, and of course was a regular contributor to every radio and TV outlet and print pieces everywhere, many of whom are with us here today. And I'd like to throw a special thank you to Randy Johnson, who featured interviews and reflections on Phil throughout the day yesterday on his program on CKWR 98.5. That was very thoughtful indeed. I think it's entirely appropriate, too, that we're on the set of Footloose, a show that just reached 130% sales because of the success of the production. It extended it, and just by coincidence, today was a dark day. They're not on. They're on tonight, but the afternoon was open. So it was very good. It was meant to be that we're here. Phil and Barb were here for the opening of this production. And who'd have guessed we'd be back again today? Now, this afternoon, we have a sample of some of Canada's absolute best musicians, and they're going to be assembled on this stage and will perform as we do a real salute to our friend Phil. And isn't it something that each one of them you're going to see in here today all live right here in Waterloo region? Now, our processional music for the last half hour has been provided by none other than Tim Lewis and his trio, consisting of Dave Thompson on guitar and Jimmy Boudreau on drums. Fantastic, versatile performers. Tim moved to Canada from the United States. One of the very first people he met was Phil Bast, and they've been friends, tight friends, ever since. In fact, Tim played at Aaron's wedding not too long ago. And the family's only request that he would play was that final song you heard, Billy Joel's I Love You Just the Way You Are. Very nice indeed. You know, after his departure from the record, Phil became a self-taught videographer. And son Aaron introduced him to his friend Mike, who is a film student, a graduate in film production. And he tried to teach Phil some of the art. But after a few lessons and some of his early videos, he said, no, he'll learn on his own. Mike determined that Phil would have his own style. So throughout the afternoon, today we're going to be screening and presenting some of Phil's video clips, from the early ones, the very recent ones, right up to some very, very current ones. The old ones were rather, well, they were very poor. And you're going to see just how shaky he was at the beginning, and his cheesy voiceovers. Aaron described it as when Phil was still on training wheels with his camera. So, but we're going to watch some of these videos in clumps and pieces throughout the afternoon, and you'll see how progressively they improve. But before that, after that, we're going to hear from Aaron, Phil and Barb's son, who will be paying his own special tribute to his dad. I won't come out and introduce every single act, so that's why I'm setting up the video now, and then Aaron, and he'll be here on behalf of the Bast family. Thank you.
Ice skates and hockey sticks, the Canadian cliche for winter fun. But the Crossroads community of Alma, Ontario, population growing, prefers their own toilet tournament. The village's annual Plunger Plop packs a punch. With practice comes skill, and with experience comes the secret to enjoying time off the ice.
On a real tour,
yeah,
like
man.
3 weeks vacation.
Plungers on the road. Got tour bus going.
They used to do the tin can bonspiel and curl, but being the outdoor rink, we had a couple mild winters and no ice, so they had to come up with a new game, and I'm pretty sure it was Jim DeBach that created this game.
Yes, indeed, it was Jim DeBach who created this toilet plunger Super Bowl. Despite the deep freeze, long-distance runner DeBach heats up the 6-hour marathon as master of ceremonies and chief cheerleader.
This event began in 26 years ago. This is the 26th running of it. It's an optimist activity. It's a fundraiser for the community. Normally we get 48 teams, 4 players each. We have 192 players, and they come from all over. A lot of university students are here, but mostly it's a grouping of community people that gather annually to enjoy this event. Nowhere else on the earth do they do this. Only in Alma. This is the center of the earth for plunge stops.
Well, actually, you can't keep the lid down on a good idea. Flush with victory, previous plunger ploppers have not only taken the sport to heart, they've taken it all the way back
From
home.
where?
From Walwa, Northern Ontario.
Yeah.
Now they're establishing the plunger top up north in Walwa for the winter carnival. So it starts off March break.
Really?
And they actually get to throw the first toss to start it off, my parents. And they actually won it one year here.
It's a community thing. It's a unique thing. I mean, we're playing with toilets. This is the trophy. It was made by the shop teachers at Park Manor. So you can see now it's multi-layered, soon to look like the Stanley Cup. They wish it would look like this.
Don't you get 10 for
Yeah, but it takes you on to
Plunger tossers praying for some warmth can slip into the church next door to the Cow Palace ice rink, where they can refuel with a steaming bowl of chili. Out on the ice, the toilet talent continues non-stop as players take the victory plunge with a well-aimed toss.
Yeah! That was like a work of art, man! Woo!
That one always gave me a chuckle. He called it toilet talent. And you gotta love that the record gave him the creative reins to pair his classic James Earl Jones voiceover with that extreme Winter Carnegie. It was one of his earlier video segments for the record when he was first getting going as a videographer. It was a new beginning after he retired and a new field, but many of the same people in the community, and let me tell you, it was certainly by design. This is an incredible turnout, and my family and I are very warmed that you could all be with us here today to celebrate the life of my father. We'd like to thank everyone for coming here, to the visitation, for the phone calls, the emails, the text messages, the social media comments, and the news coverage. It was absolutely amazing, overwhelming, and it's a real tribute to how he touched this community and all of us. Extra special thanks to Herb Good, Patrick Schlitt, and Ed Ringwald, and Drayton Entertainment, Steve Roth, Neil Aitchison, Alex Moustakis, everyone who's speaking and performing today, as well as everybody else who's chipped in with the little things here and there. I'm glad we're doing this celebration in a way that's a little different and suits my dad's unique style. And nobody could accuse the man in black of not having a unique style, whether it was his shiny black leather jacket, a backwards Kangol, or a brown leather fedora. He could pull it off and rival the likes of James Dean, Samuel L. Jackson, and Indiana Jones all put together. Over the years, my dad's style grew on me, and our relationship grew too. It morphed into something that was much bigger than father and son. One of my earliest memories, I was about 5. I remembered him coming home from the record every night for dinner with his mom and I, or with my mom and I. I'd be playing with toys on our house at Ellis Crescent in the kitchen, and I'd hear the lock on the door turn. I'd drop what I was doing and I'd run over to the door and I'd hug his leg the minute he walked in. And then just when his guard was down, I'd slip my hand up into his pocket of his brown corduroy jacket and I'd dig around to find some lifesavers or a toy or whatever he brought home for me. He always had something with him, and it made my day, and he knew it. He was a huge advocate for my education and always wanted to be involved. I think it's safe to say that his involvement peaked when I was in senior public school and he got involved with a couple of my big projects that year and blew them out of proportion. One was a Canadian Studies project called My Favorite Canadian, and somehow it turned into an interview with David Suzuki at the Seagram Museum. And the other was a history project on Pearl Harbor that turned into an extremely legitimate 4-page newspaper pullout built up with real stories from microfiche at the KW Record and the KPL. I got A's on both, but I definitely lost some credibility with my teachers because they were not dumb enough to believe that a 12-year-old could do this by himself. In university, I wanted to move home and save some money. I was at Laurier and my parents were just moving into a new place. And there was an unfinished basement, and instead of snagging the basement for himself for a study, he went out of his way to reorganize it and renovate it and make it a perfect pad for me to hang. And I was able to live there the rest of my way through school. He loved to come down and crash visits when I had friends over. My buddies loved chatting with him, and he was embraced as one of the guys whenever he was around. When Natalie and I decided to buy our first property and have a rental unit there, he was quick to get on board as our unsilent partner. And he worked with me side by side, seeing projects through, and man, we did a ton of projects. We went nonstop. He dubbed us as weekend warriors. and we were always ending a Saturday with a trip to drop off some Renault rubble at the dump. We both loved visioning a project together, getting increasingly excited about it, planning it out, and seeing it through. It was a lot of hard work, but it was something we loved doing together. He had a do-it-right the first time attitude, and his knowledge and support gave me the confidence to step up to any challenge, and we took on some big ones. On the surface, the reward was knocking it down, and hearing my dad say, "Makes a huge difference, buddy." But I can say with certainty that the truest reward was the process of doing it with him. Over the years, our relationship continued to evolve, and we grew closer. He was a great father, a solid business partner, and my best friend. I'm not the only one that got to have a multi-dimensional relationship with my father. I'm sure many of you did as well. I know my mom sure did. They were a great pair for each other and loved to try new things. They were rookie farmers together at the farmhouse they rented out in the 70s in New Dundee. They took turns supporting each other to get through university. They took ballroom dance together and even forced me to learn the cha-cha-cha. They traveled all over, and one of the highlights was their Turner Classic Movies cruise for their 40th anniversary last year. She loved traveling with him, and they talked about that trip in particular all the time. Their trips together were important because she didn't have to share him with all of you and me, and that was their time. I'm glad he was here for my mom, myself, Natalie, my son Carter, and all of you. We're definitely better and stronger because of him. So, now that I've brought everybody down a notch here, in the spirit of keeping things light, I wanted to share another one of those early days videos. I really like these ones and remember them in particular because he was learning the craft. As Neil said, they were cheesy, and he was like a kid discovering new things. I love the passion he had for life, his happy-go-lucky approach, and I think this one captures it pretty well. Thanks.
Check ignition and may God's love be with you. This is ground control to Major Tom. Really made it great. And the paper.
A foul, miserable October day that could kill a shuttle launch at Cape Canaveral. But up north in Guelph, Canada, a little rain can't stop this small, determined band of earthlings with a special mission: to boldly go where no art gallery has gone before. It's the historic McLeave Suitcase Art Gallery space launch at St. George's Square. Head video programming director Scott McGovern is both confident and optimistic.
You know, the suitcase, which is full of art, it will leave our Earth in approximately 1 hour, and it will orbit and attempt to spread the good word about Canadian contemporary art to not only an international audience, but an extraterrestrial audience too.
Earthling artist Michael McCormick, captain at the helm of this space mission, assures the public all safety precautions are in place.
And it's very secure, and there won't be anything. We're not using any toxic chemicals or anything that we have to worry about. So it's
and the community at large can rest reassured that this is not going to come down on the mayor's Mercedes.
No, they can count on us to make sure that it won't happen.
Somewhere up there, about once every 90 minutes, you'll see a piece of Guelph history, or at least you can imagine a piece of Guelph history, hurtling overhead.
Scientific and political oratory precedes the launch.
Our mission is to break the final frontier on the display of Canadian art.
Then comes the highly anticipated countdown.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast off! That's probably the fastest launch I've ever seen. It's just went so fast.
An artistic success, despite what cynics and skeptics might think. And a spoof case performance that's simply out of this world.
Check ignition and may God's love be with you.
Good afternoon. So happy to see you all here. You know, in life, people come into it and they have a role or a purpose. Some will test you, and some will use you, some will love you, some will teach you. I think, but the most important trait of all are the ones that bring out the best in you. Philip did that for a lot of people, a lot of artists in this area and many other places. And he was one of my very good friends for 43 years. And I'm going to miss him a lot. I'm Italian, I'm very emotional, and I might break down. So, my name is Peter Padalino, and like I said, Philip and I go back a long, long time with so many good memories. And I was very, very happy to find out that I could be a part of this. This is Ralph Hedke. He'll be accompanying me on this next song. And this goes out to Philip. Actually, Ralph went to high school with Philip as well, so we go back a long way. And this goes out to Philip, and it's called God Bless the Child. You'll get them that's not shall lose. So the Bible said, and it still is new. Mama may have, and Papa may have. God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own. Yes, the strong seem to get more, while the weak ones fade. Empty pockets don't ever make the grave. Mama may have, and Papa may have. God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own. Crowding round your door. When the money's gone and all
may give you. Crust the bread and such. You can help yourself, but don't take too much, Mama Mia and Papa Mia. God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own. Crowding round your door. When the money's gone and all your spending ends, they won't be round anymore, no more. And rich relations may give you crust of bread and such. You cannot help yourself, but don't take too much, Mama may have, and Papa may have. God bless the child who can stand up and say, I've got my own. Every child got to have his own wealth. Thank you.
Blood, sweat, and tears couldn't do it any better. That was Peter Padalino and Ralph Hetke, formerly, still Major Hoople's boarding house. We've heard them all over our radios for a long time, and that's what he looks like. What a voice. And they've toured the world, and they're right from Kitchener. Terrific. God bless the child. Now we have an insert on your program that's not shown. We have Phil's brother-in-law, pals before they were married. And he married Barb's sister, Linda. In fact, he takes credit for putting things together a little bit. Aaron calls him Uncle John. His name is John Shevkanik, and I'd like to ask John now to come and say a few words.
That in order to keep this brief and to avoid public weeping, I wrote some of these things down as I was thinking of them this morning. I first met Phil just almost 40 years ago. Our social milieu at that time was Tim Hortons on the corner of King and, at the corner of University and Weaver Street. Popular place in the wee small hours after the bars closed. And he had just come back from a time in the UK. And our first connection was music. It was something we could talk about for hours. We were part of a larger circle of friends, and I was very pleased when he became engaged to my fiance's sister. We consequently became a very special, he became a very special brother-in-law. I remember him driving miles to help me attempt a large renovation. He spent days with me, and his motivation was no small motivation in seeing me through it. He was never short of ideas, which he could freely present to me at any time, and he did. But I couldn't have accomplished it without him. We shared many special moments over the years, but I became increasingly impressed with Philip's ability to engage people. Early in our marriages, we both became involved with the Uptown Residents Association of Waterloo. Phil had a very strong vision of what Waterloo could be. We talked about it often. When there was an opportunity to respond to a study, the Woods Gordon Report, I don't know if anybody remembers that, but he did so enthusiastically. We did a walk all the way up through the downtown on a very bleak day, taking notes. He was very proud of the many ideas that we had that made it into the city official plan and actually came to fruition. He loved to talk about ideas, and even more, he loved to enact them. With his wonderful ability to network and his remarkable unflagging enthusiasm, he became a great facilitator. He was so generous of spirit, and his reward ultimately was seeing his dreams realized. Philip was more than a friend, he was my brother. He was a presence in the room, and I will sorely miss.
Thank you, John. Now, Barb told me that when she and Phil dated, he was working for Zehrs as a truck driver. And he made deliveries all over the area to various Zehrs stores as well as various Zehrs customers. He drove big trucks and little ones. Now, one time he took one of their big trucks down Park Street. You know where I'm going. That little bridge there at Swanson's Home Hardware. That's a low bridge there. And the truck got wedged. It wouldn't move. It wouldn't budge one way or the other. And he sat there and wiggled and jiggled and did what he could, let some air out of the tires, still nothing. Finally, a big Waterloo Regional copper came along, and with brilliant eloquence, he said, "Are you stuck?" And Phil had a sense of humor. He said, "No," he said, "I was just delivering this bridge and I've lost the address." Included in the list of his customers where he delivered regularly was the brand new Holiday Inn in Cambridge. And Phil and I and Barb and my first wife, Helen, who's with us here today, same one. We both spent our first night of marriage at the Holiday Inn in Cambridge, out at Hespeler there. It was a brand new hotel. It was pretty fancy. It had king-size bed and a swimming pool. It was really a deal back 2 or 3 years ago. Anyway, he delivered there twice a week in his Zehrs truck, and then when they got married, they were going to spend their first night there. Barb said he had the cute little green Opel GT, his car. And when they went to the Holiday Inn, he backed into the loading dock. And then he realized, Barb says, "I think I'd like to go in the front." Perhaps he was just a little nervous and distracted. Their wedding was in December, nearly 41 years ago, and Barb said he was really warmly welcomed into her family because she has seven sisters, no brothers, and he was the first man in the house in a long time. And they made a big fuss over him and made him very, very welcome. I'm just giving a few of her little reminiscences. She said one of their early dates was at a Chinese restaurant in Toronto. And he was shy. He broke the ice. He snapped open the fortune cookie. And it said, "You will be hit by a flying object from the north." she always knew there was significance to that. Anyway, I could reminisce and tell more of Barb's stories than if I think of them, I will. But those were neat little stories that we got together the other day to plan this. And then we learned that throughout their entire marriage, Barb and Phil have maintained and earned lasting, loving friendships with many, many people. And one such friend is Lance Othmer, who goes all the way back to university days. Their families grew up together. They were neighbors, and they were always there for each other. Lance and Phil spoke to each other essentially every day. And I would now like to call Lance to the microphone.
That is a true story, by the way, about Phil backing into the loading dock. And I think I may be the object from the north that came and hit him. My name's Lance. Just want to start out by saying that when we came here a few days ago, I'm standing up here and I said to Barb, Barb, I said, I'm usually used to talking in front of doctors and nurses, and I don't know, I'm going to be really nervous talking to a lot of friends or family. She looked at me and she said, well, look, why don't you just imagine everybody with a surgical mask on and in their underwear? So this is normally a question that I would ask Phil. And I know Phil would probably have agreed with everything that Barb said, but he would have said, just lose the underwear. So public speaking came easy for Phil. I just can't imagine how many people he's imagined naked. Phil is my best friend in the world, and there's a Beatles song that best describes my friendship and relationship with Phil. There's a lyric in the song that goes like this. I wasn't going to sing it, but I'm going to try. Do you believe in a love at first sight? Yes, I'm certain that it happens all the time. I get by with a little help from my friends. That was Phil. It was 40 years ago today, well, not exactly today, that I met Phil. And I met him in a small farmhouse. Pat and Yara, mutual friends of ours, invited us all over there. And here's me, the science major, kinesiology. There's Phil, English major, both University of Waterloo graduates. The science jock, the intellectual philosopher. Phil studying Shakespeare. Me, I'm studying Grey's Anatomy. Kind of an unlikely pair, don't you think? But we did have one thing in common. We both enjoyed a beer and a stimulating conversation. Barb and Louise became friends right away. And our families and our friendship became intertwined forever. Speaking of stimulating conversations, there's one person who could always get Phil into an animated, stimulated conversation. And that was his buddy Murray. We would sit on the back porch at Phil and Barb's, and Murray and Phil have known each other since they were the age of 4. We'd start talking about, over beer, politics, the U.S. state of whatever the U.S. was doing. They both agreed, disagreed with what was happening. And it would go on for, it almost seemed like ever. And we were having so much fun that I'd finally take my referee whistle out and go, time out. I'll go get some beers. Our family spent a lot of time together in the backyards, on our decks, or at the dinner table. The mutual love of our families brought us all closer together. I mean, I've always seen Aaron as my other son between Kelly and Kyle. I've enjoyed helping him and Phil with his properties and spending time with Natalie and little Carter, and I will continue to enjoy that time with you guys. Hanging out at the pool in Thorndale was and still holds some incredible memories. Everyone waiting in joyous anticipation for Phil to come descending down the slide into the pool. It was Kelly, Kyle, and Aaron's goal to recreate that same amazing splash every time. Yeah, Phil Bast, he made a splash wherever he went, especially in the arts and entertainment community, from covering TIFF in Toronto to helping local upcoming musical artists or theatrical artists. He said he once wanted to create an electronic quote of the KW region. We are feeling the ripples from his mentorship. That's little Phil. I just threw that in there, ripples. From his mentorship and positive example in our local and national community. When someone would offer to pay him for his help or his advice, he'd always say, pay it forward by helping someone the way I've helped you. That was Phil. Many struggling artists and established artists have benefited from Phil's fluently written articles in the Record, and most recently hits on his YouTube channel or the Record website. He did these things because he was so passionate about the arts. Well, we all know Phil for his big, baritone, soothing, and eloquent voice. Well, it wasn't always that way. I remember it well. I'm taking voice training, he said. He announced this one day, a few weeks with a renowned voice coach, learning to use his diaphragm to project his voice. Honestly, I had my doubts, especially in the beginning, when he really didn't have control of that projection thing. Speaking softly and whispering, it wasn't an option. I'd look at him and say, Phil, you're going to hurt somebody with that thing. Well, that thing, that beautiful voice, full of life and wisdom, it's going to be sorely missed, guys. This is funny. Over the years, we lost our names, basically, somehow. Phil became Bear, I became Bear, and Aaron, he was the third Bear. So to hear the three of us in conversation, it could get confusing for anybody listening in. The Bear and I, that's Phil, we're always running things by each other. You know, whether it was the latest home renovation, cars, our careers, you know, so when he wanted to reinvent himself as a videographer at the Record, we had a few beers and again some stimulating conversation about it all. What a great idea was my response. Well, little did I know that how much time we'd spend in his office looking at videos. When Louise and I would come over for dinner or just to visit, Phil would pull me into his office and we'd start to edit his latest masterpiece. Oh, it was over a couple beers, of course. This was in the early days. I think he used me as like a sounding board. He'd run ideas by me about the sound and which clip to use, and it was fun. But it didn't take long before my input wasn't required anymore, and he became brilliant at it. And it shows, from a short post on the Record to the marvelous Mel Brown documentary. I just want to say, though, that I want to take full credit for the toilet plunge. He did stop asking me for advice after that one, though. I always saw my friend Phil as a composer and a great conductor. He actually was a guest conductor at the KW Symphony one year. He was thrilled. He had the uncanny ability, or dare I say spirituality, to focus attention on his desires, eliminating any negative thoughts and manifesting that desire into something concrete. We all know and love Phil for his passion, his joie de vivre, and his glass half full philosophy in life. He would all want us to continue with that legacy. And as Aaron said earlier, please celebrate with us today and always the life of our dear friend. We can raise a few glasses of beer later and have some stimulating conversation. To Phil, my friend, I love you. You will be missed, my friend, but certainly not forgotten. And Barb and Aaron, Natalie and Carter, you'll always be part of my family.
Hello, everyone. I really wish I could be there with you this afternoon to help celebrate Phil's life and work.
Oh, thank you. Now, for those of you who don't know Kevin Ramasan, he is described by my good buddy Phil as the best guitarist in Canada and now in the USA. Phil asked me to go and see excellent local artists, and I'm so grateful he did. You and Louise have got to see Kevin with me and Barb, he said. Kevin was playing classical guitar one evening, and Louise and I were blown away. Then one night, Phil and I went to see him with Stealing Dan, a local group of classically trained musicians, and I was pleasantly surprised to see Kevin, I didn't know he was in the band, hitting every jazzy Steely Dan note. It gives me great pleasure to share a video from Phil's friend Kevin, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. He's currently performing in New York.
I'm sure much has been said already about him, and to those voices I'd like to add this song. I wrote this a while ago as a song of gratitude for the unexpected and sometimes undeserved joys in life, and I'd like to offer it now as a celebration and remembrance of a tireless champion of the arts and a good friend. This is called His Gift.
Kevin Ramasar, another great Canadian talent who's right now playing on Broadway in New York. Whew, we had some great goosebumps here today. You know, another video Phil shot was at the recent opening weekend of the Jazz Room in Waterloo at the Huther House. And we're going to look at that right after, and you'll see how his work has improved. But we're going to first hear from one of his former colleagues while at the record, the former assistant editor, also now retired, and we still see once in a while featured in guest columns with very insightful, great contributions to our editorial reading. My pleasure now to ask Chuck Howett to come to the microphone.
Good afternoon, everybody. Before I begin, I just wanted to read a message from another good friend of Phil's who couldn't be here today because he lives in England, Jim Nagel. Jim sent me this morning. So I'll just read it. Phil is responsible for my not being here today. I'm in England. I first met Phil in the late 1960s through his role in a play called Christ in the Concrete City. Phil was an actor, I didn't know that. He must have been only 18 or so. I was a reporter at the Record, and for both of us it was a time of exploring the new era of music and inner space. Only last Saturday here in England I had reason to recall a time with him in his mother's kitchen. We were baking brownies late at night. I loved Verna, his mother. She was a saint. She had recently moved to this plush apartment building on Margaret Avenue from the old Bast farmhouse on Bridgeport Road that had to be sacrificed to the expressway. It was Phil who discovered the incredibly cheap one-way flights to England in 1970 and spread the word. A dozen or more of us paid $71 each to ride in an old propeller aircraft that, with hindsight, was probably on its way home to the scrapyard. They wouldn't let it fly from Toronto. At the last minute, we were put on a bus to Niagara Falls, New York, for takeoff. It stopped at Gander to refuel. We landed at Gatwick just in time for the Isle of Wight Pop Festival in 1970. That winter, Phil was part of a gang of Canadians, Australians and Kiwis sharing a flat in Hammersmith and riding the tube to deliver letters during a postal strike. A great way for tourists to discover curious crannies of London. In June 1971, we were all at the first Glastonbury Pop Festival. That's where Jim lives today. Phil returned to Kitchener via more of Europe a year or so later, but I ended up staying in England, which, as I said, is why I'm not here today, much as I'd like to be. I saw Phil, of course, on my trip to Canada in June, just this year, never guessing it would be for the last time. He spent a whole afternoon driving me around KW, amazing me with new developments in the 8 years since my last visit, not the least of which was Aaron's new house overlooking the Grand River in the Bridgeport area. We ended up at his home for Barb's amazing peach and cashew stir-fry. Afterwards, he left Barb and me to watch his Mel Brown movie while he went off to do some work. He, of course, had already seen the movie and made it. And now, as I write this, I have a sobering thought that I probably watched it sitting in his very same reclining chair. Phil Bast, you're 1 in 10 million. As they say here, may you rest in peace and rise in glory. That's from Jim Nagel. Jim actually was how I first met Phil. Jim introduced us way back in 1980. I had already started working at the Record, and Jim was back on one of his visits, and I was working nights in the newsroom on the rewrite desk taking stories from correspondents, and this guy would be hanging around the newsroom, and I wondered who he was. And So we got talking, and it was Jim. He had somehow worked it out that he was doing a freelance article for the record, and they let him come in at night to use the computer terminals. So anyway, I got to know Jim, and one day he said, "Chuck, let's go cross-country skiing up north in Hanover." So off we went and drove up there, and Phil and Barb were there. It was at the house of Rick Wright, who I believe is here today. And anyway, we got out on the slopes, and at some point Phil fell and broke his collarbone, I think it was. Anyway, before all that happened, Phil took great interest in the fact that I worked at the record. And he pumped me with questions. What was it like to work there? You know, I'd really like to work there, and who should I apply to, and on and on. And I think he was at the university at that time working. So anyway, the weekend ended, we went home, and that following summer, I walked into the newsroom one day, and there was Phil sitting at a desk working away. So anyway, we became friends after that, and I did play a minor role in his getting in there. But anyway, so Phil and I were reporters at the record in the early 80s. We sat side by side in the newsroom, and Phil covered Waterloo City Hall, and then he moved on to the university beat. A lot of people forget about that because he was an editor for most of his time there, but he did work as a reporter for about 5 years. Very good writer. Phil had a good grasp of how to craft a good feature story. And when I think back of those days, one incident just popped out in my head. Every year, of course, in October, we have Oktoberfest, and back in those days, a big deal during the week was the Miss Oktoberfest pageant. And nowadays, it's kind of a pale imitation of it, but anyway, somehow somebody gave us a tip one year that one of the contestants had actually appeared in the pages of Penthouse magazine. The contestants back then were brought in from different, I don't know where they came from, the US, or they were professional pageant contestants. And so anyway, this was somehow dropped on Phil's desk to come up with a story on this. So Phil, being the energetic and guy full of ideas, as you heard, came up with the idea, well, I'm going to phone the publisher in New York City, Bob Guccione, see if I can get him on the phone. So I think it took a day of negotiating or calling or persuasion. And Phil did, in fact, get Bob on the phone. And I can't remember whether he taped it or what, or whether he handed me the phone at one point, because I listened, and there was Bob talking in his bedroom voice. And anyway, Phil wrote up the story. I think it ran on front. I didn't save a copy of it. But anyway, Bob defended the honor of the contestant. I don't think she won, but anyway, it was one of Phil's better stories in his reporting career. Phil moved on to the desk as a copy editor in the mid-1980s, and I always felt he was good with computers. He was quite knowledgeable around computers, and I recall another time where he actually came up with a system where he could file his stories from home. I think Aaron was a young child at that point, and so he was telling me with great enthusiasm that I can sit at home at night and send in my story. And but the editor at the time, as I recall, managing editor Bill Dunfield, did not look kindly on this. He had visions of looking up and seeing an empty newsroom as we all sat at home in our pajamas, holding a beer and sending in our stories. So that was nixed. Phil was not going to be filing any stories from home. So anyway, it demonstrated his knowledge of computers. He was always looking for new ways of doing things. So anyway, he went on the desk, and I followed a couple years later in 1988. And around about 1990, well, Phil was entertainment editor by that time. So I was asked to move over and help him with the section. It was a two-person job back in those days. This is before, there was, of course, no electronic paper then. It was all print, and it was a bigger paper. But the two of us would come in early in the morning. The Record was an afternoon paper then. And Phil would come in about 6 in the morning, check the wires, check the photos, have a look at what was covered the previous night. And I would come in about an hour later and we put the section together, finishing up about 10 or 11 in the morning. Then we'd move on to working on our weekly tabloid, which still exists to this day. So that was basically the routine. I worked with Phil for about 4 years doing that before moving on to the local news desk. But I guess when I think back of those times, Phil had a love of building and construction, and he actually tried to start another business around this time. It was called Lindell Cedar Homes and Sunrooms. And so Phil, he got that going. Phil had dreams of being an entrepreneur, I think at one time, and he had a great love of architecture and homes. And so for a while there, he was actually doing two jobs. He would work on the paper till about 2 in the afternoon, then he'd switch over and work on his cedar home business. And just the energy of the guy just amazed me. I couldn't believe that. But I think he was conflicted at that time. He was around 40 and he thought, do I want to finish my career at the Record or do I want to own my own company? And I think he really didn't know where to go with it. But the way it ended was the recession took down that business, and Phil decided, I'm going to stay at the Record. And I think it sort of rekindled his interest in being at the Record, and that's when he plunged right into it and carried right through until he left. But and just when I think of what we did in those days, one incident story stood out for me, and it kind of summarized some of the stuff we worked on. Was the Sass Jordan story always stands out in my mind. You've probably heard Sass Jordan. She was on Canadian Idol, and she was a singer who achieved some Canadian fame. Anyway, at that time we had on staff Joel Rubinoff, who still works at the Record to this day. And Joel and Phil had an interesting relationship. They were kind of like blood and water. They had different philosophies of how to cover entertainment. Anyway, Sass Jordan was doing a local concert coming up in the next week or so. So the Record, we traditionally would do, say, an interview right in advance. And so Joel was our music critic. So anyway, he did a phone interview with Sass and wrote up the story and handed it in to Phil. Well, Phil wasn't pleased because Sass did not have a good day during this interview. Sass was in a bad mood, and Joel, that came through in the story. That was Joel's style. He didn't believe in sugarcoating things. Whereas Phil had a different philosophy. He enjoyed promoting the arts. He believed we should be positive. If they had something negative to say, don't hammer them over the head. And so I'm not sure how I kind of fell in the middle on that one, but not knowing Sass Jordan that well. But Phil had to be the face of the Record, so he felt we have to present a more positive image. I think they worked out some sort of an agreement in the end, but anyway, that's basically what happened. It kind of stood out in my mind. But another one of Phil's great strengths, I felt, was he had this great grasp of breaking spot news. And I saw that when he was a reporter. If there was an accident or something breaking and he was on it, he really dove into it, and he had a great sense of where to go and how to get the detail and how to present it. Another story that he did so well in my mind was when Lulu's reopened. Lulu's, of course, you all remember, was a popular venue, and it was so unusual because it was so big. And I think Peter played there a number of times. But it was closed for a while, and then new owners bought it, and it reopened. And I just remember Phil, he did that entertainment page, and he just had that, he had a photo, and he had that huge headline, Lulu's is back. And I thought, wow, you really hit the nail on the head, buddy. Wow. He did it. But Phil left the record in 2006 to start a new career as a videographer. And I remember when he left, he told me he was really excited. I thought, Jesus, I'd be nervous, but Phil said, Chuck, you got to leave the record now before you're too late to start a new career. Well, I'll think about that one, Phil. Phil was excited. He was going to start a new career. And so he went out and he became a videographer, cinematographer, and around about 2011, I was involved in this. We have an annual dinner for retirees and former employees, and so we came up with this idea, I'll do something on life after the record. We'll talk about people who left and what they've done, and so we had a short list of about 4 people, and one of them was Phil. So anyway, I interviewed the other people quickly on the phone, took notes. We didn't want to go into too much depth, and then I called Phil and said, Phil, would you be okay if I talked about what you've been doing since you left the record? Phil said, sure. So I started to talk to him on the phone, and he says, Chuck, let's go to lunch. Okay. So we went to lunch, which was fine. So anyway, we had lunch, and Phil talked for a solid hour about what he'd been doing, and I took notes, took a lot of notes. Anyway, so I went, and I spoke at the dinner, and of course I had way more material on Phil than anybody else. So naturally I talked way more about Phil than anybody else. Some people complained after, but I thought it was good material. Anyway, what stood out for me when he talked about what he had done after the record was the Ed Video story. He went over to Ed Video in Guelph because he wanted to learn about video. And I guess they don't have that here, but anyway, it's a studio cooperative where you can rent equipment and shoot video. And anyway, Phil was there, and he was going there for a few months, I guess. And you know, most people when they go into a new place, a new situation, it's head down, just don't make too much noise and try to learn as much as you could. Not Phil. He walked in there, and I guess he'd been there a few weeks. He looks around, he says, this studio's kind of shabby. Can't we come up with something better than this? So somehow this is what he told me. He got on the board of directors, and then he started scouting out a new facility in downtown Guelph, and lo and behold, within I guess a year or so, he had them moved into a whole new building with a much improved studio, and I was just blown away by this. I thought, wow. To me, it just summed up Phil to a T. Like he contributed on so many different levels. Yeah, to me that's Phil. Wow. And then just in recent, okay. Anyway, I've been told to wrap it up by Neil. That's about all. I'll cut it off. Thank you.
Thanks for sticking to your 3 column inches there. Now, as I introduced a while ago, here's the video that Phil shot, the most recent, at the Waterloo Jazz Club.
Opening weekend at the Jazz Room sells out before it arrives. Operated by Grand River Jazz Society volunteers in partnership with the Heather Hotel, the Jazz Room celebrates top local and touring musicians. Friday night gets underway with Jason White at the keyboard for the pre-show dinner crowd. Larson sets a brassy note on trumpet with Dave Martin on trombone. Sax guru Mike Murley headlines Saturday's concert with a smoking hot 7-piece band. Septet plays, another performance takes place beside the stage. Barefoot artist Laurie Wanfer Nolan paints a portrait of the band, part of a triptych that will hang on the wall. Jazz Room, Fridays and Saturdays at the Hewther Hotel.
It's okay, kid. Not everybody likes jazz. Some people cry. You and I know that music has the ability to heal, so let's put that to the test. I want to thank Jimmy and Dave for their support, and we're going to need your support on this one. Barbara and Aaron asked us to learn this song specifically. It was the classic Gershwin tune. They can't take that away from me. Because of that opening line about the hat. A lot of the words were true, but some weren't on the mark, so we took some liberties. We changed it. I know Phil would like it. The way you wear your hat. of all that. No, they can't take that away from me. The way your smile just beams, the way you sing off key. The way your voice so deep. No, they can't take that away from me. We may never meet again on that bumpy road to love. Still I always keep that memory of your cameras and your mics, always on the scene. The way you changed our lives. No, they can't take that away from me. No, they can't take that away from me. We may never meet again on that bumpy road to love. Still I'll always keep the memory of your cameras and your mic, always on the scene. The way you changed our lives. No, no, they can't take that away from me. No, they can't take that away. No, they can't take that away. This is where I need your help. They can't take that away. Oh, they can't take that away. Sing it out. Oh, they can't take that away. Oh, they can't take that away. Oh, they can't take that away. No, they can't take that away. Oh, they can't take that away from me. I told you.
Tim Lewis, thank you very much. And of course, Tim's got CDs and everything, but we're not selling them in the lobby. He's a great guy in our community, and I understand he's letting his name stand for nomination next year in the federal election. Good for him. Great man. Now, I want to thank everybody on behalf of the Bast family for honoring them today with your presence, and remind you that we have a reception right here in the lobby afterwards. Just we're about soon to finish, and it will be a cash bar because this is Drayton Entertainment. And it will be open. And yesterday was the Random Act of Kindness Day. It was interesting. I think it could be renamed Philip Bast Day, because he's been doing that sort of thing for many, many years. Just, you heard about someone today said, pay it forward. And very interesting, just a recent email came through where he was helping with a band, a local band, doing video work, promoting, connecting, engaging, helping them all along the way. And in their long, detailed, technical email, it got down to the bottom where it said they wanted to pay for his services. And Phil's note, his response was, as for your offer to pay, just pay it forward. Somewhere, sometime, some young artist will need your support. As an arts journalist and a video artist, my life has been so enriched by the artists and musicians with whom I have crossed paths that I gladly celebrate each and every one wherever and however I can. God bless, Philip. That was it. And this takes me to a poem I've used on occasion, and I think it's perfectly suited for this day. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on his tombstone from the beginning to the end, 1935 to 1979. And in the middle was a dash, 1939-1979. He noted first came the date of the birth and spoke the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. Could that little dash represent all the time that he spent alive on earth, and now only those who loved him knew what that little dash was worth? For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters most is how we live and how we love and how we spend our dash. So think about it long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left that you could rearrange. If we could just slow down enough to consider what's true and real and always try to understand the way other people feel. Be less quick to anger, show appreciation more, and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering that this little dash may only last a little while. So when your eulogy's being read, with your life's actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they said about how you spent your dash? And now, to wrap things up, two of Phil's close friends, we have another pair of world-class musicians, world master pedal steel guitar man Ed Ringwald, and three-time Canadian Country Music Association fiddle player Shane Guzet, both from our community, and they're going to finish with Amazing Grace.